So I asked them at the table to give me a word that would describe how they feel about what they do right now in this moment. So as I introduce them, I'm going to also give you the word that they gave me. So Mr. Lindsey Bierman is the Chancellor of UNC School of the Arts, and he feels exhilarated. Dr. Beverly Emery is Superintendent of Winston-Salem Forsyth Schools, and she feels called. My Chancellor, Dr. Elwood Robinson of Winston-Salem State University, feels passionate. Dr. D.E. Lorraine Sterrett, President of Salem Academy and College. This is what the word she gave me. Gusto. And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce our wonderful, fabulous moderator, Dr. Karen McNeil Miller, President of Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust. She is fabulous, and she gave me a word as well, humble. So ladies and gentlemen, I present exhilarated, called, passionate, gusto, and humble community conversation. So at the very end is the exhilarated Lindsey Bierman. Here then is the passionate Elwood Robinson, the called Beverly Emery, the gusto Lorraine Sterrett, and the humbled Karen McNeil Miller. And welcome to all of you. I'm excited about this conversation. We want to spend some time getting to know these folks, and when I contacted them before the event, I said, I'm not going to tell you the questions I'm going to ask you, because otherwise it's going to be a conversation. You don't, send your friends questions in advance. So we're just going to have a conversation, and what we want to do is find out a little bit about them as people. We want to find out about the person behind the role. We want to understand their call to leadership and the leadership challenges they have in their respective institutions. And we want to find out how they have entered our fair city and get their perspectives on Winston-Salem. Now, along the way, if you have a burning question or want to follow up on anything that we're already talking about, I'll try to keep my eyes open and let me know, and we'll let you ask your question right then. Otherwise, we'll have plenty of time at the end for you to ask them any question you want. Okay? So before me, I've got 2 North Carolina natives, a Michigan native, an Ireland native, a French major, science major, psychology major. Lindsay, I don't know what your major was.
History, French, and architecture.
History, French, and architect major. 3 who've had a long career in education and educational institutions. 1 new to higher education. But yet you all end up in Winston-Salem together to lead institutions that we all count on being successful, depend on being successful. So before we jump into the business, let me ask you about kind of who you are and how you became who you are. So tell us about where you spent the first 10 years of your life and how that shaped who you became. And who would like to start? How about the call, Beverly?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, not far from here, but I was actually born in Newport Beach, California, to a Marine Corps father and a very young mother who had never traveled outside of the state of North Carolina before she joined my dad at Camp Pendleton. And as soon as my dad left the Marines, moved back to North Carolina, where most of my growing up occurred. What I would tell you about impact is not geography. For me, impact was two amazingly loving parents who never had a chance to go to college and who had incredibly high expectations that all of their children would, to the point that we each got to spend the summer working in a cotton mill so that we could appreciate where we didn't want to spend our careers. And so I would say the most powerful impact in my first 10 years were the family, the expectations, the love and caring that I was very fortunate to grow up in.
Ivanhoe.
First 10 years of my life I spent growing up in a very rural town called Ivanhoe, right? So I grew up in a house with about 400 square feet probably, with no running water and no bathroom. And I stayed so far back in the woods that I had to walk a mile to catch the school bus in order to go to school. But I think Deb hit on something. In the midst of that, I had two very loving, caring parents who would do anything for me. And the most significant event happened in my life that shaped who I am, where I am, was when I was 6 years old. And it was actually getting promoted from first grade to the second grade. The most significant event that has ever happened in my life. And you say, why is that? There are urban legends, it's probably country legends, that it was very difficult to make your grade. So every summer people would ask folks in the community, did you make your grade? So I grew up thinking this was one of the most difficult things to do in life. So when I was in the first grade, and it was obvious because I'm sitting here that I was very smart. and I knew that I was very smart. And I knew that I was the smartest person in the classroom. But I didn't know if I had made my grade at the end of the year. And so when I got my report card, I was terrified. Terrible. I couldn't find it anywhere. I said, what? You know, I'm panicking. Well, my first grade teacher, Miss Murphy said, turn it over. I turned it over and said, promoted to the second grade. I see it now. It has followed me for the rest of my life.
Lindsay, how about you?
I grew up outside of Detroit, and I'm an only child. I was, as a child, I can't see out of one eye, and so I grew up, I had a patch over the eye and glasses. I was very awkward and dorky, and I was a bit of a loner, but I became an artist. I drew, I painted, I built, I made things. I was constantly getting immersed in some sort of artistic endeavor. And my parents have always been music lovers. My father has thousands of classical recordings. He was an engineer, but also a musician. He improvised, he's great on the saxophone and on the flute. And so I grew up listening to classical music, jazz recordings my entire life, and just developed a passion for all of that. And they really shaped who I am. Music education and music appreciation has been consistently important to them, and I've learned from their example. But I also found great solace and healing and inspiration in the arts.
I spent the first 26 years of my life in Northern Ireland, and that's where I was born. I grew up in a place called Newry, right on the border between the north and the south. Newry is famous for absolutely nothing, except if you've seen the movie The Crying Game, there's a scene at the beginning of the movie where they're kidnapping the British soldier and driving him off through little country roads, and there's a road sign that says Newry 8 miles. That is our only claim to fame. So I, like some of my colleagues here, was the first person in my family to go to college. My father was a truck driver. My mother stayed at home and raised 3 kids. I'm the middle of those 3 kids. I think the combination of growing up in poverty, growing up as a middle child, and growing up in a civil war has profound ramifications for being an educational leader. A civil war is great preparation for being an educational leader. And I think those early influences have had everything to do with the person I am today. There's nothing like a civil war to make you a pacifist. And since I came here, I've joined the Moravian Church, and they are very big on pacifism. There's also nothing like a civil war to make you understand that you really must listen to all points of view, and that people aren't just arguing for the opposite point of view to be obnoxious or to annoy you. They may be arguing for the opposite point of view because that's something that they really believe in. However misguided they may or may not be, they are arguing from a point of what they believe in, and I think that has influenced everything I do in the decisions that I make on a daily basis. I talk a lot with my cabinet, several of whom are here today. I listen to what they have to say. I'm ultimately responsible for the decision, but I always feel I would be crazy if I didn't listen to the good people around me, so that has had a profound influence on me.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. So you all are in charge of institutions that are teeming with young people. Some, at the university, some non-traditional older students, but primarily young people. I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old in my house. And I tell them all the time that when you're in high school and college, that age range, you're just one stupid decision away from ruining your life. So tell us how close you came to that one stupid decision.
Are you implying we did not make that?
It's up to you if you want to disclose. So who would like to share how close they came to that stupid decision? Lindsay would. Are you sorting through all the stupid decisions? Come on now, you gotta share.
All right, I'll go.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will make the disclaimer that I do not want to offend any attorneys in the room, because that is part of my story. But when I graduated from undergraduate, I did what I thought I should do rather than what I wanted to do. So I went and I did what everyone else was doing for my graduating class, which was either going into pre-law or investment banking training in New York. So I went to go work for Proskauer, Rose, Getz, and Mendelsohn on Park Avenue. I was a paralegal, and I think I shouldn't admit this, but I think I burst into tears on the second day. Because I wasn't being, I of course didn't realize it at the time, but I know now, I really wasn't being true to who I am, and I was not following my passion. So I'm glad I didn't go to law school. I don't think I'd make a very good lawyer. Maybe I would, I don't know. But I quickly kind of shifted gears, and I went into, much to the horror of my parents, I will say, when I took, I think, a cut in pay by nearly half, and went into the media industry, and the rest is history. So it turned out to be a good thing.
I would say that my almost decision is even stupider than that one. I almost decided not to go to college. And when I was growing up in Ireland at that time, only 15% of the high school population went on to college. And neither of my parents had gone to college and had through no fault of their own, no sense of what it meant to have a college degree. And so I was planning to leave at my education at the end of high school. And then my Spanish teacher, God bless him, and he was so handsome I listened to every word he said. My Spanish teacher was also the guidance counselor for colleges. And I was saying, well, I'm not actually planning to go to college. And he looked at me and he said, well, there are many reasons why you should go to college. And I took in every word he said, and then I went home and talked to my parents. And they were not in tune with those reasons, but they didn't stand in my way, to their credit. They didn't stand in my way, and so I finally decided, okay, I'll apply to go to college. But it was touch and go, I have to say. And without that one teacher taking the time to push back on me and say, you need to reconsider what you're doing, my life would have been entirely different.
I'll say to you a little more. I just have so many. I'm going to use one since it's the ACC tournament. I hope I don't divide the house even further here, but when I graduated from high school, it was the first year that girls could be nominated for the Moorhead Scholar. I had already been accepted to NC State. My high school boyfriend was going there. I wanted to go there. I'm not really even sure now exactly what motivated that, but I had to go to that ominous scholarship interview. My parents were so proud, but I purposefully didn't do well in that interview because I really didn't want to go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I hope that doesn't change any cardinal opinions of me here. And I never told my parents until probably 10 years ago.
Okay, come on, fess up.
Nothing like that's ever happened to me. One of the things I will say, I mean, and it is really similar to what I began by saying who I am. It's very difficult for me because I had no models in terms of to look at for higher education. So when I went to college, it was the first time I had ever set foot on a college campus. And I was literally terrified. I mean, I was terrified. And I probably would have left and gone back home. I was that terrified. So I think, that's kind of something that has stayed with me. So when I think about students who are coming, particularly from areas which I came from, first generation, those students they don't have the kind of models that they need in order for them to succeed and be successful. But I stayed, and I think that is a good thing.
So I think those are heavily filtered responses. But we'll take that.
Well, I wasn't going to tell you about my prom date.
Okay, don't. Just leave that to us to imagine. All right, so let's get down to business. So you all four lead institutions that are unique in one way in that you all get a lot of public scrutiny. And there's a lot of negativity and negative press now. So from the value of public education, why don't we just give every child a voucher and let private and secular institutions proliferate? The value and the relevance of a single gender education. The value and the relevance of historically black college and university. The value and the relevance of arts in higher education. So how do you defend, promote your institutions in light of all of that criticism and negativity?
I don't mind starting with that one. I would say, in all candor, that we deserve that criticism. I think that we, and I speak only for myself in this, I think that often educational institutions fail in explaining to families and in explaining to students what the value of this education is. I am firmly of the belief that a liberal arts education, and by liberal arts I am of course referring to the humanities, the natural sciences, and the social sciences, all of them, they're all part of the liberal arts. I believe that education prepares you for any career. So when a student asks me, what will I do with a history major? I say, anything you want. Because I've had countless business people, some of them in this room, telling me, send us students who can read and write and think and do math. And so I think we have failed miserably in demonstrating how the liberal arts education prepares you, because it does. We have just failed to explain that. It prepares you for any career out there.
And what about single gender education?
Single gender education, of course, this is a very pertinent topic at this moment when we had these very, very sad news last week about the closure of Sweetbriar College, which I regard as a tragedy. And I think that has occasioned pundits to pontificate on the question of single gender education. But I would hasten to add there that there are many things that go into whether a college in a particular place at a particular time with particular people in it will succeed or not. And so I'm very wary of all the generalizations out there that this is a sign that women don't want to go to women's colleges anymore. Where have they been? They have not been at Salem College, for example, where we have a 12% increase in enrollment, so much so that we're building a new residence hall. I think it's peculiar to each particular situation, and the Sweetbriar situation is extremely sad and somewhat puzzling. Depending on which news story you read, they may have had a $94 million endowment. So people are saying, why are they closing when they have $94 million? But we've been looking into this situation because, of course, it's of great interest to us. And what we discovered just yesterday was that their costs per capita per student are over 3 times what our costs are at Salem College. Why is that? I don't know exactly. I know they have a huge, huge campus. It's an expensive campus to maintain. They have all kinds of costs. So this is why I feel that nobody should be generalizing what this means for women's education, because it means very different things in very different places.
Lindsay, how about you?
The arts is a $500 billion industry in the United States. And yet there's this misperception that we're graduating students into a world where they're not going to find jobs or they're not going to have meaningful careers. We assume that they have to study nuclear engineering to make a living, or some such. $500 billion. To put that in context, that is just so there's that. We haven't done a very good job of telling our story and of sharing the student success that I've seen just in my short time there. We've had 30 companies on campus a few weeks ago competing for students in our design and production program. There were several hundred interviews on campus. We talked to several. Cirque du Soleil has 80 of our graduates working for them in Las Vegas. That is by far the vast majority of people who are behind the technical magic that we see at Cirque. And of course, our graduates are behind the scenes and on stage and on screen at organizations all across North Carolina. That's been a huge impact on the state. I think that this myth of the starving artist is nonsense. And I think that we just have to do a better job and I need to do a better job of making sure that we insert the missing letter into the discussion about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, so that it's STEAM to include arts. Because the other part of the conversation that I wish we could begin to discuss is that I don't want to just quantify the value of the arts in bottom line numbers. I think there's reams of research that can support that, but I also think we need to reclaim the intrinsic value of arts and artistic education, just to the value of society and to the spirit and to our culture as a whole.
I would agree with what's been said. Is I don't think we oftentimes tell the story, and I'm about telling the story. I came up and I talked about being passionate. I'm passionate about historically black colleges and universities because I understand the history of those institutions and also understand what those institutions produce. Just some amazing, incredible individuals. I was at a speaking engagement recently, and I asked them this. I said, what if there were no historically black colleges? There would be no Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, you talk about one of the greatest individuals who ever lived. And so there's a space for all institutions. This country is blessed with having a veritable smorgasbord of higher education, different kinds of systems, and different kinds of institutions. And that's what really makes us great. And so for me, it's about telling that story, telling about what our graduates are doing. I wake up every day thinking about how to tell the story, how I can meet someone and change someone's perspective about our schools and about our university. I'm proud to be the chancellor, I think, of one of the great universities in this country. It's not just a great historically black college or university, it's a great university. And that's what I want folks to know. It's not a university for African Americans. I go around and I talk to people and they say, well, you got a black school. I don't have a black school. You know, I have a great school that's open to anyone who wants to come and get a high quality education. And we think we do that well. I was so proud. Many of you, if you don't follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you should. Because I'm all about promoting Winston-Salem State University. We sent out something yesterday about our graduates. We have the highest percentage of graduates who now are employed in the UNC system. So when you talk about Winston-Salem State University, understand what we're doing.
What about defending public education in its role in this country?
I first want to say one of my dear friends from Eastern North Carolina was passing his Twitter pictures of him dancing at the CIAA. I sincerely, when I use the word called, sometimes believe that while you're old enough to retire, you get to a point where you have to stop and say, all of the experiences of my life have prepared me to be in this place. And my fear is that for years we have enjoyed in public education sort of that monopoly feeling that while we provide opportunity and access, that we had a corner on the market, unlike my colleagues who compete for their students. But I believe now more than ever, the elements of charter and voucher and choice enter the arena and make defense of public education a more challenging place for us to be. I'm really proud of many people in this room contributed to a long time ago because our system, I think, is uniquely poised. We hold a higher market share than the large urban districts in our state because we have had choice options within our public schools for a very long time. And while people have some criticism of that and some of the unintended consequences, I do believe it leaves us in a place to keep kids engaged in the public schools in an equitable way, unlike some of the other options that are available to them. Like my colleagues, I'm not going to apologize that maybe we haven't told the story as well as we need to. It's that constant dilemma with dwindling resources of how do we stay in the arena and do the work, but also publicize and tell the story at the same time. Incredibly challenging. Your public schools are growing children, and in most cases they're growing them more than a year's worth of time for a year's worth of school. The fact that kids come to us, many of them, 1, 2, 3 years behind is a challenge that we face, and we have to look at straight in the eye and figure out how we accelerate that learning. But if you evaluate it strictly on, do kids get growth for the time they spend in school? Absolutely, it happens in public schools, and particularly in this school district.
sometimes it feels like there's this huge blame game that starts with, I don't know if that's me, it probably is me, so I apologize. That starts with businesses saying, we aren't getting what we need out of the colleges and universities. And the college and universities say, well, you should see what we have to work with out of the high schools. And the high schools say, well, if the middle schools would just do their job. The middle schools say, the elementary schools are just playing games down there. And elementary schools say, well, we could just get parents more engaged. So I cannot imagine any circumstance in which that is productive and helpful. So how do we stop that blame game and shift the conversation to the more powerful, positive messages that you all have to share?
I'll start. One of the things I really admire about this community is it's the first place in a 30-year career I've not felt the schools are blamed for everything. So let me thank this community. I feel like there's real ownership here, that whatever issues the schools face are community issues. You are really living proof of that. We have so many nonprofits and foundations and folks who want to own those issues. It feels really good. It feels like you don't have to worry about always looking over your back and can focus on what steps do we need to take to address it. And I think that's creating a culture where we make it psychologically safe. Let's take blame out of the equation. What do we have to do to fix it? What does that look like? And really trying to get people motivated around solutions. Do we need universal pre-K? Sure we do. Would that make kids more kindergarten ready? Absolutely. Is that going to make it any easier? Maybe 50 years from now. But in our lifetime, what do we have? How do we bring the best strategies and resources in our businesses? I would venture to say all of us the best people to help solve those problems and just forget blame, right?
And I think that's great, and I think it also begins with conversations and discussions like this, Karen. I mean, I think what you see here is kind of what you get. I've been so thrilled having met all the academic leaders in this community, and they're so inviting and so collaborative. And I think that's what's going to be needed if we're going to educate the whole child from beginning to end. We got to begin early on. We got to begin with the parents. We got to begin with every system, educational system or business community, will all have to come together because it's not just one person's problem or issue. It is everyone's issue. And I think that's what's going to help us. And I think this community, I would agree. I've been here now coming my third month, but this community has been so inviting, so engaging, and has such a spirit about it, particularly in terms of education. And collectively, I think we have an opportunity to do something amazing. But we can only do something amazing together. We can't do anything amazing from an individual standpoint.
So before you all answer, you all are obviously passionate, called, exhilarated, gusto, but there are tens of thousands of people in your employ. There are tens of thousands of students, at the end, that are the consumer and the customer. How do you keep them positive? And how do you pass on these messages of excellence and aspirational messages? How does that permeate? How can you permeate that through the entire institution?
I agree with my colleagues wholeheartedly. We're all in this together, and that's one of the things that I most appreciated about this community, and the collaboration not only among the educational institutions, but the collaboration across the entire community. People who are involved in all kinds of businesses, all kinds of nonprofits, who are very much interested in working with us and having us work with them. And I think that's the only way that we're going to come to grips with the very real problem that you have identified.
are, but also here is how we will work one-on-one with each individual student to meet that student where he or she is, because I hate the cookie cutter stuff that you so often see in education. One size fits all, we just put these kids in the classroom and they'll all learn the same way and they'll all come out with the same results. No, it just doesn't work that way. And so I think the value of small institutions is that we really work individually to meet students where they are. That doesn't mean that we water down chemistry, but we bring the students to chemistry. We help them learn what it takes to succeed in what are traditionally regarded as hard subjects.
I inherited an institution that had gone through fairly dramatic transitions in leadership at just about every level in the organization. I've always tried to lead by example. Higher education is very hierarchical, and I'm kind of uncomfortable with that. I mean, it's necessary to get things done at times, but my feeling is that I've never been one of those people to take for granted the role of staff and faculty and the value that they bring and the ideas that they bring to the table. It's unfortunate, I think, that sometimes there are leaders and managers who have the point of view that people are lucky to have their jobs. I feel like I'm lucky to have this team of 400 people who are the face of the institution. They're every bit, those everyday interactions that students have with our faculty and with our staff and with housekeeping and the deans, I think all of that, I value everyone's input and feedback, and so I try to lead by example. And I hope that that has a positive effect on the entire organization. In my experience, it has. Getting back to your earlier question about some of the blame, I have not experienced that. I feel very fortunate that we've been in direct contact with industry and talking to them about what changes do we need to make in our curriculum to make sure that we're preparing the workforce that you need. And so that has been an open dialogue that we've had since before my time.
So we're talking about communication, and Elwood mentioned follow him on Facebook and Twitter. I know that Elwood and Lindsay use social media a lot to get to students. Why do you do that? What's the advantage to you? Why is that a good thing to do?
I think it's a good thing because as technology has evolved, some of our systems have been slow to evolve along with it. And I think what's happening in higher education is we're behind the times in terms of how we educate students for 2015. I think our systems are more 1990, and our students are now in 2010 and 2015. And so it is a form of communication that is real time, and that's what folks are asking for. And that's the kind of systems that we want to make sure that we put in our academic institutions. People want feedback, immediate feedback, and that's so important. And that's what they can get from a social media standpoint.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a Facebook addict myself. I'm not on Twitter, but I am a Facebook addict. And I think the advantage is also for the softer side of things. It lets you engage with students, and it lets you engage with alumni, in our case, in a very informal way. So even people that I've never met are my Facebook friends. If you're on Facebook, you know that every morning you get this notice that tells you which of your bajillions of friends have a birthday that day. And we just had a beautiful thing happen yesterday when we were holding an open house for the Sweetbriar students who were coming to Winston-Salem. And I walk into the building where I'm going to give a presentation to the Sweetbriar students, and working at the desk is a Salem student who's a student worker. Her birthday was the day before, and I always send a happy birthday message to everybody who comes up as So in front of some Sweetbriar families, she said, "Where else can you go to a college where the president wishes you happy birthday on Facebook?"
Tell me where are we on time?
We have 5 minutes.
Before 1:15?
No, before 12:45.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, good. All right. So back to our regular scheduled program. Did you want to respond to that?
I was just going to talk about a little bit of difference in our customers when it comes to social media. Seriously, I live in a different world, and while the communication from the system or the organization to parents or community or constituents echoes what you heard here, we face real challenges in how we handle access and what kids know and say and speak. And so imagine that you're in a lockdown or that you witness a tragic accident and you can take a picture, tweet, or talk about it before the safety mechanisms that need to be in place and the proper communication can happen. And so in my world, in fact, one of my greatest framed pictures from this last season is our communications person sent me a Twitter feed where my head is in a mosh pit cheering because I called a snow day. That's what Twitter looks like in my world. And when we don't call a snow day, I would never look at it. I have trouble. But I think there's some ways to use this. Again, it certainly makes communication very, very quickly. We recently, I know it's not a secret to anyone, dealt with a very difficult, critical situation. The ability to use technology to immediately set up a website, to immediately allow people to register so they can get information quickly. Every time a document was posted, an email went out to tell people a new piece of information has been put up. Certainly there are advantages to how we can communicate with our stakeholders.
So let's continue on the technology thing for a minute. We're talking about how we use technology to communicate with students or not. How is technology being used to help educate students in a way that we would have never even thought about, maybe even 10 years ago or 5 years ago?
UNC General, I'll take it. I'll start. The UNC General Administration has hired someone recently to look at online education opportunities for the system. And we're working closely with him to identify a void in the online marketplace that we can fill. We've got a little bit of funding to do some proprietary research on that subject. I think that we're just beginning to we'll put our toe in the water and then dive into the deep end, I think. MOOCs were all the rage, massive online open courses, and then it turned out, well, maybe they're not so great. Maybe the quality isn't as good as one-on-one instruction in a classroom with a teacher who is credentialed. I'm being a little flip, but I'm also being serious, because there are people out there who are promoting themselves as teachers who actually don't have an education in what they're teaching. And that is quite frightening to somebody who's a chancellor. But I think that there are many examples of online education. UNC Chapel Hill has, I think, more people getting online MBAs than they do on campus. And so I think there are many success stories. And I think we're kind of in a research phase right now and beginning to explore those opportunities.
I think I come to that question when I come to everything as a middle child of a product of the Civil War. There are 2 points of view. There are at least 2 points of view, and I don't see it as all or nothing. I think online learning has been spectacularly successful in some areas with some students in some subjects. But there are other areas where it's very hard to see how you'd be sitting down in a reading a book with the students. I'm a literature person myself, but I recognize that even within that, there are many ways to do that. There are many ways to do literature, and there are online programs for teaching foreign literature that are wonderful because you can click on the word that you don't know and find out what it means instead of having to go and lift that heavy dictionary off the shelf. So I think it's the kind of thing where we need to take the best of several ways of doing it and not just jump on the latest bandwagon of the MOOC. And the MOOC, I think, even when taught by very credentialed people, can be double-edged. It was wonderful when it first came on board, and I was at Harvard at the time, and Greg Nage, a very famous professor of classics, put his very famous Heroes class onto a MOOC, and there were thousands of people signing up. You know, a 90-year-old woman in India signed up, a 14-year-old in Italy signed up, and they were all writing to us saying, can we get copies of the information and the materials before the course starts? And you don't often see that for a regular course, so there was something about the very medium itself that created excitement. But then how many people actually followed through and completed that course? It's such an awesome course that I myself took a look at it and said, oh, maybe I can do a MOOC. But when I saw the reading list, I looked at my schedule and looked at the reading list, and these two don't go together. And so I think we need to be careful about things that sound spectacular, maybe even are spectacular in some ways, but may not be the end product that we're looking for as we attempt to address all the questions that you've raised about how to prepare students for the next level of education and how to prepare students for the world of work. And we really need to get to grips with what are the various mechanisms, little pieces of which we need to bring together into something that really works.
Am I the only one that doesn't know what MOOC is? Okay, you don't tell me what it's
Massive online
open
open course.
Thank you.
So if you want to take a history class anywhere in the world, you can sign up.
Okay, thank you.
Here's what we know, that online education is not going to go away. And in fact, it has been probably the most, as Clayton Christensen would say, the most disruptive thing that has happened in higher education in the past 20 years. We have to somehow come to grips with what it is, how we do it. We have to control it. My problem with online education has been that it's been driven from outside as opposed to being driven from inside. And I've made a call for us as leaders, us as professors, to take control of this and come up with ways of doing it correctly. I just came from Cambridge College, and that was a college that was, if you talk about online education, they would run you out of town. But when I left, they were certainly going into that space because we needed to go into that space. So what do? We have online education. We have Phoenix, for example. I was telling someone the other day, how do you get to a point where an educational institution has a football stadium named after them? They named the football stadium University of Phoenix Stadium in Arizona. So you know they're making all kinds of money. But they're making all kinds of money on the backs of folks who want these degrees. The issue, look behind what's on online education, is access. People are saying, I want to be able to get a degree. And how can I get it? And so they're jumping on the bandwagon. We need to figure it out.
So I'm going to, in just a moment, turn it over to you all to ask any questions, so start thinking about questions you have. But at first glance, you all seem like an unlikely set of allies with your institutions. So what are the challenges you all have in common? Where are the areas that you all can and should be working together?
I think we all face the problem, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we all face the problem of that pot of gold. We all face the question of resources, and we're extraordinarily blessed to have so many educational institutions in Winston-Salem. And a couple of months ago, Lindsay and I got together for lunch, and in the space of one lunch, we came up with 8 or 10 things on which we can collaborate. We already share an Oregon teacher. We're looking into sharing a German teacher. Then the first words out of Lindsay's mouth were, I don't have enough dorm space. And I said, well, I'm building a new dorm that I don't expect to fill in the next couple of years. He said, could I rent some of that? I said, yes. He said, would it have to be female students? I said, yes. enough that we're not in competition with each other. We are similar enough that we can share things, and it seems like a marvelous opportunity for us to be doing just that.
We also, in addition to what Lorraine just said, we do have some shared services with Winston-Salem State, and I think that there's more that we can explore. We get help from Winston-Salem State, just for some are smaller, on Title IX, and auditing services, and also the big one, Center for Design Innovation. So we share responsibility for that, and I think there's more ways that we can work together. And I encourage your daughters to apply, and they can stay in the lovely new dorm.
And it is, I think we all share, and I think Lorraine said it best, is that we all share in terms of getting back to the basics in terms of higher education and education in general. And that really teaching folks fundamentally how to read, write, think, and those kinds of basic skills that you mentioned, you said so eloquently, are sometimes associated with the liberal arts. I think we're all kind of in that space, and I love that about where we are now.
I think all of us are also extremely dedicated to working with the community and with the community leaders to improve the Winston-Salem community in Forsyth County. I think there's dedication on everyone's part to help launch new programs and initiatives. Like last night when we were talking about healthcare in the region and how that benefits the entire community, all of us need to be working toward those goals. So I think I look forward to, that's one of the things I love about what I'm doing now, is that ability to work with everyone.
Yeah, that's been terrific. And Lindsay and I have also partnered on a film series, and we've partnered with River Run and in a little theater in our new student center. And the film school asked us that they use our little theater. I said, are you kidding? The fact that the film school likes our theater is a real feather in our cap, so come on over. So we did a program jointly with River Run and the School of the Arts, and it was just so satisfying to be able to work with other institutions in that way, but also to be able to contribute to the larger community.
And the fact that we're all here at Winston-Salem State University is also very good.
We've heard the word access mentioned several times, and I think that that's one of the beauties of this collaboration. In public ed, it's our job to make sure the access all children have, they're prepared to access those other opportunities. And our chancellors talked about not having been on a college campus before he went to college. There's no reason of the 55,000 children that go to our schools, public schools, that any of them don't have an opportunity to walk a campus well before they ever go to college. And I think that's something we can easily accomplish and really support that access